He's a sociologist, and he operates at the Faculty of Social Science in Masaryk University, and he's been there since 2002. And he's also at the Bratislava International School of Liberal Arts, and he's been there since 2015. His focus are on issues of ethnicity, race, and migration studies. And he's been a visiting scholar at the New School University in New York and at the University of London. He's lectured at Georgetown University and in many other parts of the world. And he...
No, don't read everything, but I would say...
Since 2010?
No. Representative.
He's the representative of the Slavic Republic and European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, the ECRI, the human rights body of the Council of Europe. Since 2010, he's also the chairman of the board of the Fulbright Commission in Slovakia, and he's done...
I just wanted to highlight...
And he's done research at the European Center for Minority Issues in Flensburg. And most importantly, he took the program that you're on last summer, and it was a distinct honor to invite him back as a lecturer here. He's a serious, knowledgeable scholar. And today he will speak about from Masaryk to Butora, recent anti-Semitism in Central Europe and its functions. So I think very importantly, we spent time understanding the rise of this reactionary social movement in the Middle East, and now we're also in the next few days we'll have some focus on what's going on in Europe. So thank you for
Thank you very much, Charles. I wanted to highlight my ECRI affiliation because that's something what I'm proud of, and besides other things, I'm sitting next to Michal. I believe that you met him yesterday in London, and we are somehow fighting with racism in Europe. Not successfully enough, I would say, but we are trying. Okay. Well, I know, and I heard that you're actually falling asleep every day after the lunch. So this is really a challenge for me how to keep you alive. I'll do my best. And just a few words about my motivation. Last year, I realized that the program was focused on many interesting things, but what was missing somehow was a Central European perspective. And I talked to Charles, and we somehow came with the idea to tackle the issue of anti-Semitism in Central Europe, at least in a nutshell. So I'll do my best, and of course, naturally, since I was born in Czechoslovakia, I will be speaking much more about Czechoslovakia than about Poland and Hungary, speaking about those countries that are at the moment perceived as countries of Central Europe. And it has one implication which is maybe a little bit forgotten even these days in Israel itself. Central Europe is very much affiliated with Israel and Israeli politics and Israeli social and cultural life at the moment. Don't forget that those people who were establishing Israel and the first Zionists, actually at the end of the 19th century, were coming from our region. They were coming with certain ideas, with certain cultural patterns, with certain habits, with certain ways how they were operationalizing the world for themselves. And you can see this, you can smell Central Europe's Israeli life and Israeli politics until these days. You know, in a folk dance, national dance Hora in Israel, which is actually coming from Moldova, you know, and which is a peasant dance from Moldova. When you listen to national anthem of Israel, all Czechs, and since I grew up in Czechoslovakia, we are laughing about it. All Czechs have a very bizarre feeling that Israel is still the Vedřich Smetana Vltava, you know, song. And when Israelis are landing in Prague, and when Czech airlines are featuring Vltava by Vedřich Smetana, Israeli tourists asking themselves why they are actually featuring national anthem of Israel to us. This is very pleasant. Those songs are, and by the way, even the words are actually resembling Polish national anthem. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła. You know, our hope is still alive. You know, if I remember Israeli anthem properly. And of course, even Knesset was shaped after Polish Sejm. And Israeli right is very much resembling Polish right, and Israeli left is very much similar to Polish left, and I can continue. So those interconnections are very vital, and as a person from Czechoslovakia, of course, I'm very proud of the help that Czechoslovakia offered to Israel in 1948, and it's well remembered in Prague and in the whole Czechoslovakia that those affiliations were very important. Okay, let me just, and maybe I will just try to present it from here. If you will allow me, I will dance somewhere here. Those of you who are sitting here, you will not probably see what I'm going to present. So very briefly, this is my presentation. And this will be provocative for this crowd. Anti-Semitism in Central Europe has been playing a role in the political battle over open society and liberal democratic regimes since dawn of modernity. And I will present you the case of Masaryk, which is one of the best examples of this thesis. At the moment, although not perceived as a pressing problem by Central European societies, anti-Semitism serves a function of exclusion and disqualification of liberal elites fostering liberal pluralism and multicultural society. So in fact, and as I will come to that, it's not about Jews anymore, but wait, it's even more dangerous than before. It's the code on which all enemies of open society are able to identify themselves in a crowd. In Czechoslovakia, one can draw a line and observe attempts to disqualify protagonists of open society from Masaryk at the beginning of 20th century through the reform process of 1968, Charter 77 leaders, up to disqualification of Velvet Revolution leaders after 1989, and putting a question mark on civil society leaders nowadays, such as Martin Butora in Slovakia. Well, before that, let me do something, I will spend just a few minutes on that, because we have to operationalize Central Europe, and I know that last week you had a discussion about Central and Eastern Europe, so let's try to define what we mean by that. This black and white perspective, which was brought by Cold War after 1945, of course, was not taking into account that the so-called Soviet bloc was divided into many, many units which were culturally close to each other. And Central Europe, if you want in German, Mitteleuropa, was just one of them. Then you had Eastern Europe, countries of that time, well, not really countries, such as Moldova, Ukraine, Belarus. Then Balkan countries, which were very distinctive. They always had these roots in the Ottoman Empire. Russia, which cannot be put into block with others. It's too unique, too big, too special. Central Asia, Caucasus Mountains, and of course you can go deeper. This is just in a smell of those differences. Hanseatic cities in the north, or cities on Adriatic shore in the south. So Central Europe, as you see, was just one of those units. And of course, you can ask yourself, where are the borders of Central Europe? And it's very fluid. In the same way as Europe. Europe, I can ask you, where are the borders of Europe? And you will say probably on Ural Mountains. In Paris, people are saying that borders of Europe are on the border between France and Germany. The Germans are absolutely convinced that it's on the border between Germany and Czech Republic. I can assure you that Czechs are absolutely convinced that it's on the border between Czech Republic and Slovakia. Slovaks are putting it on the Slovak-Ukrainian border, etc., etc. And people in Vienna are saying that actually Asia starts already in 13th district of Vienna, inhabited by Serbs and Turks. So there are very fluid borders, and people from Asia actually can say that it's a peninsula or subcontinent. Europe is a subcontinent of Eurasia. So Central Europe has very liquid borders. And how to define it? There are many ways. There are cultural definitions, and I'm going back to Milan Kundera's definitions, who said, in this romantic style, that Central Europe is the place in Europe which is smelled by beer and by watermelons, and all train stations look very much the same, and once they were named after Kaiser Franz Josef.
it's a space of cultural trauma. This is how we very often define it. Traumas caused, I mean, there are Polish colleagues who, you know, for Poles, Warsaw Uprising, even after 3 decades, three generations, is highly traumatic event. Revolution in Hungary, 56, highly traumatic event for Hungarians, and the same occupation of Czechoslovakia for us. You know, I grew up in a situation when this was discussed practically every day. And this is how we can define Central Europe as well. By the way, how Central Europe was rediscovering in the 80s, some of you might remember it, when Kundera brought his definition of Central Europe, how to distinguish this part of Europe from the rest of Eastern Bloc, from the grayness of Eastern Bloc. And with a lot of sadness and frustration, he was defining westernness of Central Europe. That this is the West which was kidnapped to the East by, you know, in this metaphoric way, how Zeus is kidnapping Europe from the beach. And he's writing the deep meaning of their resistance is to struggle to preserve their identity, or to put it another way, to preserve their westernness. In 1989, of course, it changed very much, but I will come to that. Some people still define it as a Zwischen Europa, you know, genuine German concept. Basically, countries in between Germany and Russia. We don't have time to go deeper, unfortunately. Mitteleuropa, German concept of Central Europe, which is basically saying these are lands which were heavily influenced by German culture. Not necessarily by German nation, but by German culture. Bloodlands, you know, I know that some of people here, you know, I'm looking at Charles, don't like particularly Timothy Snyder, but yeah, I mean, this is the...
He's a gentleman.
Sorry?
He's a gentleman, he's a nice man.
Yes, no,
his ideas are problematic.
Okay, yeah, so, you know, but still, some people are defining Central Europe through, you know, the bloodlands, you know, the land which is soaked by blood for centuries. Small ethno-linguistic national states, you know, after the collapse of Austro-Hungarian Empire, the whole Central Europe changed into the bunch of small ethno-linguistic states that are fighting each other, that didn't reconcile with each other, and it's increasingly problematic, and it's waiting for the reconciliation. You know, I would call it reproachment, not really reconciliation will happen there. And we, of course, we are very proud of ourselves. We think that we are a region of great brains. You know, you are recognizing Freud, who was from the recent Czech Republic, or Skłodowska from Poland, or, you know, Rubik from Hungary, and of course many others. You know, I can continue with that. And today, Central Europe is institutionalized in a form of so-called Visegrad Group countries since 1991, which was an attempt to unify Central Europe in the same way as there was an attempt already in the 14th century to unify Central Europe against enemies from the west, east, and the south. Not very successful. Well, that was the destiny of Central Europe later. Now Visegrad Group is functioning, but also with some negative elements, and I will come to that. This is how I define Central Europe. You know, Apple-strudel culture. When you will have good apple strudel, you know you are in Central Europe. You know, either in Lemberg, Lviv, or somewhere in Bavaria, you are in Central Europe.
Including Tel Aviv?
Including Tel Aviv, of course. No. And this is a serious note. I mean, I consider Israel, or parts of Israel, as being very Central European.
I agree with you.
Absolutely. What was unifying Central Europe? Because, you know, you can ask, so where is Central Europe now? Why it's disappearing from our mind? I believe it's because two elements which were unifying Central Europe in the past are gone: Jews and Germans. Those two were the most important elements that, and let me say, in a very normative sense, that I'm very unhappy that those two elements are gone, because Central Europe cannot be revitalized in its form as it used to. And this is how, probably also because the previous, you know, the information from previous slide, this is where we are heading to now. what we are experiencing these days in Central Europe, and if you want in Visegrad countries, is the end of liberal consensus about the future of the region. The region started to backslide back in time into illiberal democracies, procedural democracies, soft autocracies, and hybrid forms of authoritarianism. And I believe that the combination of frustration, the fear of globalization with the rapidly growing influence of social networks and conspiracy theories creates a very toxic cocktail that is only waiting to be sized by a skillful ideologue. And there are some in the region, and they are pretty successful. I mean, I don't want to speak about Hungary, but I mean, quite recently, our Hungarian colleagues are recognizing it. Just for those of you who don't speak Hungarian, I mean, this is an official campaign of Hungary, which was running for what, 2 or 3 weeks in Hungary.
It's earlier actually, but the high-profile part, that placard.
Those of you who don't speak English, this is a stinky Jew on George Soros, who became the main enemy of Orban in Hungary. And by the way, those of you who were following it, when Netanyahu actually met with Orban, they somehow forgot to comment it, you know, because Soros is the enemy also for Netanyahu. So suddenly, all those unpleasant smells of anti-Semitism were disappearing. Yeah. Okay, so let's start the whole issue of anti-Semitism, which I somehow introduced you through very recent events in Hungary. This is the working definition of anti-Semitism, and I believe that you are talking about it, so I don't need to go into details. And there are very many conventional examples of anti-Semitism. And again, sorry?
Please get into the details.
Sorry?
Can you please get into the details, because I don't think that we mentioned it in details before.
Oh, you didn't work on definition of anti-Semitism? I thought you did. No?
It was mentioned.
Yeah. Okay, so certain perception of Jews, you know, conventional examples of anti-Semitism, and you can recognize them, accusing the Jews as people, Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. I mean, and we know them. It's I mean, useless to repeat it. And let me just add something what will bring the de-Judaized perception of anti-Semitism, which is typical not only for Central Europe, but I believe that in Central Europe is probably even more important than anywhere else. By the term anti-Semitism, we should understand universal substitutive phenomenon that seeks to blame Jews, or more often, those who are considered to be Jewish. I mean, I know something about it because, you know, I'm perceived by Slovak nationalism, fascist, something what in a history you might remember as a so-called white Jew. I mean, they are even mentioning it to me openly. For being responsible for misfortunes, political and economic turmoils. It derives from conspiratory thinking. It is accompanying modernization and globalization processes. It constitutes way of rejection of liberal democratic regime, and in the form of neo-anti-Semitism, it serves as a way of fighting against open society. And this is really what is characterizing anti-Semitism these days in Central Europe. And just very quickly, of course, what has been explaining anti-Semitism in a pre-modern past does not explain it today, and what explains it nowadays cannot be applied for the past. These days, anti-Semitism, and in Central Europe, it's visible even more than anywhere else. It's connected to authoritarian tendencies, and it becomes a cultural code for rejection of bourgeois liberalism and modern democratic society. So, modern anti-Semitism is a reflection of human mentality and readiness to fight with imaginative Jew that is behind all conspiracies. So Jews are becoming very imaginative, though anti-Semites are very real. Okay, I will switch this. So, object of anti-Semitism, it is modern society that becomes an object of modern anti-Semitism. And just very few words about anti-Semitism in Central European countries. Of course, you can, in particular countries, find various specificities that you can bring and try to distinguish various issues that were typical for anti-Semitism of 19th and 20th century in those countries. Let's say, let me pick up the example of Slovakia. For Slovak peasant society, it was very important to identify Jews with, firstly, those who are serving them alcohol in pubs, and creating alcoholics out of Slovaks. This was a major, major accusation of Jews. And secondly, and again, this is a certain particularity of Slovakia. Slovaks perceived many Jews as those who were prior 1918 Hungarizing Slovakia. So they were serving somehow Hungarian. They were serving the Hungarian rule in those parts which were not inhabited by Hungarians themselves. Yet in the Czech lands, anti-Semitism was always very low. So the accusation of this type you wouldn't find. And we don't have time, so I would go to, of course, to Hungarian and Polish perceptions, which are again slightly different. There is a difference how, let's say, Polish and Slovak anti-Semitism is not primarily racist but rather economic, while in Hungarian and Czech lands you would see much more the influence of German racist anti-Semitism of 19th century. And of course, Holocaust, in the way it was, it happened in those countries, has a direct implication on anti-Semitism these days. So you can imagine that Holocaust, which was directly produced by Slovak fascist state, and Slovaks are co-responsible, and I would say even responsible for Holocaust in Slovakia, unlike, let's say, Czechs, that is playing certain role these days. Very old research, but very good one, because we can see the differences between countries. When you look at those 5 countries, and Austria is very important here, and we have 4 various spheres. It's about influence of Jews, rejection and eviction of Jews, conspiracy theories how Jews are ruling the world, and certain attempts to put Jews under control. And when you look at those numbers, I mean, if you are following it, what you can say, what are your first thoughts about those countries? I mean, now this is a test whether you are following.
It's very hard to read the black tables.
Okay, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Austria. And Austria is important here, of course. Okay, so very briefly. Very often, scholars after 1989 had a tendency to explain anti-Semitism, racism after 1989 as a result of post-communism. Everything was frozen in a refrigerator, now it's being opened, it's pretty stinky, and and look at Austria. They didn't have communism, and in many ways the numbers, and let me be normative, even worse, in many ways. Secondly, if you look at those 5 countries of Central Europe, immediately you can recognize that Czechs are and let me be again, I mean this is simplification, the least anti-Semitic nation of the whole region. And there are many explanations of this. First of all, Czech Jews were always highly identified with Czechs, which were very developed in the same way as Germans. Czech society was somehow cured of its anti-Semitism by Masaryk and the first Czechoslovak Republic, and I will come to that. And of course, until these days, if those of you who are following it, Czech Republic is practically the only European Union country which is sometimes voting against Brussels' decisions about policies in Israel. I mean, Israel is probably following it, that if you have the voice against some of Brussels' decisions, it's coming from the Czech Republic. And again, the level of, let's say, conspiracy thinking. In case of Slovakia, the highest in the region, but look at Austria. I mean, very, very close to Slovakia. While in the Czech Republic, much less. So you see that when we are speaking about Central Europe, we speak about relatively heterogeneous region in this respect. Charles, yeah.
Least access or exposure to Jews, though, which is not a good sign. The bottom category,
Yeah.
only 12%.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. While let's say in Poland, you see that the number is much higher. But you know, Poland is very often accused of being very anti-Semitic. But if you compare, let's say, this conspiracy type of thinking, look, in Austria, it's even higher. We can return to it if you want. So, but what is the core of the problem here? And let me mention something as a sociologist. How to become part of the core? This is just anti-Semitism in Central Europe is just one of many forms of non-inclusiveness toward those who are different. Public sphere in Central Europe is still very much ethnicized. And core part of Central European society is ethnicized, built upon tribal and exclusively ethnic principles. But of course, liberal democratic regime is based on conviction that everybody should have a chance to become part of the core in all aspects of life. Well, and how to secure it? Let me just show, this is ideal type of core and outgroups in a society. And very simply, every society has its core and its outgroups. And it might be defined ethnically, religiously, by socially, even by class. Ideal type is this is a core, the borders are open, both people with permanent residence who are coming, let's say, from outside, they have a chance to penetrate into the core. But how does it look like in Central Europe? Core is defined ethnically. Ethnic group is owning the country, and of course, even those who are citizens of the country are not part of the core. And the border is closed. No matter for how long you have a citizenship, you are not part of the core. Based on Slovakia, and this is something I know personally very much. We should go deeper. This is a core. No matter whether you are good Slovak, bad Slovak, cosmopolitan or very nationalistic, you are Slovak. So I'm cosmopolitan Slovak. So of course, for Slovak nationalists, I'm kind of an enemy. But still, since they are understanding according to blood, I'm having their blood. So I might be traitor, but I'm still there. So while autochthonous minorities in a country, Hungarians, Roma, Jews, they were born in Slovakia. Of course, they have a citizenship, but they are not part of the core. And then those who came from outside, they have, of course, zero chances to penetrate into the core. And how does it look like in an everyday simplification of life? There's a core, an outgroup, non-citizens, non-Slovak, bad Slovak, good Slovak. Yeah, we can apply it to Hungarians, to Poles. The discourse in Poland is going the same way. Good Poles, bad Poles. And our Hungarian colleagues say something about good Hungarians and bad Hungarians as well. They know this discourse very well. So, I don't have much time, so let's proceed finally to after all those introductions, to our topic about to exclusion of political elite from the public sphere as one of functions of anti-Semitism. Tomáš Masaryk was first Czechoslovak president and professor of sociology at Vienna University. He married a lady from Brooklyn, Charlotte Garrick, and as probably the first feminist in the region, he took her name, so that's why we know him as Tomáš Garrick Masaryk. He was very much influenced by Protestant ethique and Protestant ideas of his wife from Brooklyn, who was of French Huguenot origin. And Tomáš Masaryk was exceptionally well-educated person who became a professor in Vienna. And until the end of 19th century, when he was almost 50, nobody was questioning his origin. But then, so-called Hilsner affair started. And probably everybody, all of you know what the Hilsner affair was.
No.
No? Okay. Everybody knows Dreyfus affair,
Yeah.
and this was very similar. One particular night, in one unimportant village of Austria at that time, today Czech Republic, the village or city of Polna, local Christian lady was murdered, Aneška Hrůzová. They didn't find, there was a light rain during the night, and they didn't find any blood. The first person who came mentioned she was killed by Jews and they sucked their blood. Well, without any proofs, of course, the information started to live its life. They found absolutely unimportant person in a city of Jewish origin, Mr. Hilsner. They accused him without any proofs. He was sentenced to life, first to death, then to life sentence. And Masaryk immediately understood, he started to speak in favor of Hilsner, because he immediately understood that this is not about Hilsner. This is not even about Jews. This is about the way, the last attempt of Habsburg Catholic conservative monarchy to mobilize conservative forces against democratization and liberalization of the monarchy. Masaryk understood it very quickly, and immediately after that he was an MP in a Austrian parliament at the time, and immediately after that various interesting things started to happen. Anti-Semites started to question his origin and how his uneducated father from Slovakia married a relatively well-educated Czech, his mother, who was actually German speaker, so how did they communicate, and why actually he was born in Slovakia in a neighboring village to Hodonín, city of Hodonín, Göding. So because his mother was obviously serving in the most, in the richest house of the richest, the Jewish person in Hodonín, and various anti-Semitic myths started to be created about Masaryk. The myth is actually alive until these days. Flowers, you can find flowers on the grave of Aneška Hrůzová in Polna until these days. Czech fascists are bringing it until these days. As you realized, I'm from Masaryk University, so the university which is named after Tomáš Masaryk. Even at the university, which is placed in southern Moravia, which is the most Catholic region of the Czech Republic, some of local radical Catholics are still pouring the fire into the water, the oil into the fire, and still somehow trying to awake the myth about Jewish origin of Masaryk. And again, Masaryk simply was completely shocked by the whole campaign. His own father, who was a relatively uneducated person, asked him once, before he died, Tomáš, why are you doing this? There are only two options. For anti-Semites, there were only two options. Either Masaryk is Jewish, or he is paid by Jews. They didn't realize, they didn't understand that Masaryk is doing it precisely because he decoded the aims of anti-Semites in this situation. The life, of course, went on in Czechoslovakia, and after, I'm on purpose, I'm jumping through the World War II. At the beginning of the 50s, Czechoslovakia witnessed dramatic anti-Zionist campaign. It followed also the changes in attitudes toward Israel. Jews started to be understood as bourgeois elements, and anti-Zionism reached its peak during the Slansky trial. Probably for many of you, Slansky trial is relatively well known. Slansky trial was a show trial against elements of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, who were thought to have adopted the line of the maverick Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito. In 1952, Rudolf Slansky, General Secretary of Communist Party, and other 13 members and this is important, 11 of them Jews, were accused of participating in Trotskyite, Titoid Zionist conspiracy and community. And again, this is important. 11 of these people were Jewish, and during the trial, their Jewish names were mentioned on purpose to start and heat the atmosphere in the country. Anti-Zionism continued to be parties and state doctrine in 50s and 60s in Czechoslovakia, but most of the time it was not directed at citizens of Czechoslovakia. In 1967 it changed. And this must be noted because, again, the story of Israel, anti-Semitism, Jews, was somehow connected to the reform process of 1968. And in Czechoslovakia this is very much forgotten already. After 1967, when Soviet Union and satellites were criticizing Israel, intellectuals of Czechoslovakia stood up and actually supported Israel in its effort and its battle with Arabic countries. And it was a clear and the first sign of disobedience to official politics. And it very much contributed to consequences to the Prague Spring, which is well known. Very interesting is the case of Slovak writer Ladislav Načko, who actually emigrated to Israel, and he was deprived of his Czechoslovak citizenship. But by the way, it returned to him in the spring of 1968 in a silence. But what happened was that conservative, by conservative I mean Stalinist forces in Czechoslovakia started to utilize anti-Semitism and Zionism against the leaders and protagonists of the Prague Spring. And one of the best examples of it was Edward Goldstücker, chairman of the Writers' Union. So those who were driving force of democratization were accused by media of Soviet Union, Poland, and Eastern Germany to be agents of Zionist centers. And it worked perfectly. Edward Goldstücker, just very briefly, by the way, he was residing in the UK, in the country where we are now, for 20 years, since 1968 until 1989, when he returned to Czechoslovakia. He was born in a small town in Slovakia. He was of Jewish origin, and he actually became the first Czechoslovak ambassador to Israel at the beginning of the 50s. And he became one of the most visible target for these conservative Stalinist forces. So let's say in June 23rd, just 2 months before the occupation by Soviet Union, Rude Právo, the official daily newspaper of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, is writing, "Don't worry, your time will come, your days are numbered, you filthy Jew." Yeah? I mean, and remember, this is an official daily newspaper. Yeah? So of course, you immediately see how Zionism and anti-Semitism was utilized here. Campaign was prepared and run from abroad with very active support of hardliners such as Vasil Bilak, who played a very negative role later on in the 70s and 80s in Czechoslovakia. So Jewish background of leaders of the Prague Spring started to heat discussion, although most of the intellectuals who were driving forces of the reform process were not Jewish, obviously. In the same way as 20 years later, after 1989, anti-Semitism just should have served one function, to slow down or to stop democratization processes. And after 1969, the term Jewish intellectual enriched the vocabulary of so-called normalization times. So, to be intellectual was something very bad, but to be Jewish intellectual was the worst of the worst. Everybody knows what Charta 77 was. Yeah? The most visible attempt of intellectuals in Czechoslovakia to protest against the communist regime. Immediately after it was released at the beginning of 1977, attributes such as Jewish and Zionist were used also against Charta 77. This evil causality has been created. Mixture of Zionists, Freemasons, Jews provoked all stereotypes and prejudices. And campaign against Charter 77 actually focused on those signatories who were of Jewish origin. They were picking up them, on purpose. And I must say, and by the way, I remember it as a child in some of daily newspapers, cartoons about the Zionists, imperialists, how they were merging. This anti-Zionist propaganda was relatively successful, and let me show you what I mean by that. This is the outcome of anti-Zionist propaganda in Czechoslovakia. Very interesting figures from the middle of the 90s, and if you compare 4 Visegrad group countries, what you can see in comparison to previous data, you can immediately see that. Do you agree with those people who say Zionism is racism? Suddenly, even in country which was the least anti-Semitic, you remember, Czech Republic, people agree much more than in case of Hungary and in Poland. So 20 years repeated anti-Zionist campaign simply brought unfortunately, its fruits. Situation in the Czech Republic and Slovakia has been different since spring 1990. Attempts to awake the ghosts of the past in the Czech Republic were present, but they failed, especially in 1992. But in Slovakia, the discourse started to radicalize very much. Continuation of anti-Zionist discourse, awakening of anti-Jewish discourse from times of Slovak fascist state. I personally remember how Slovak nationalists started to publish articles from war times, basically reprinting them. Anti-globalization and anti-Semitic discourse, which was merging, let's say this is a cartoon from those times. International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. Our most favorite song is Zbor Židov, Nabucco, opera Nabucco.
Chorus of the Jews.
Yes. Yeah. So you see, I mean, all these connections were there were attempts to bring all those connections. And of course, in case of Slovakia, unlike in the Czech Republic, traditional Christian anti-Judaism was brought as well. Leading of the revolution in 1989 in Slovakia, no matter what was their ethnicity, identity, or faith, blamed to be Jewish, Zionist, and anti-Slovak. And 2 cases proved to be almost, I would say, Weberian ideal types. Fedor Gál and Martin Butora. Yeah, these are Freemasoners who are building, their Freemasonry in Slovakia. So, Public Against Violence, which was let's call it a revolutionary movement in November 1989 in Slovakia, something like Civic Forum in Czech lands, that time, was the main target of really brutal anti-Semitic nationalistic propaganda in the same way as previously against leaders of the Prague Spring and Charter 77. The revolutionary movement was blamed to be Jews, Jewish Bolsheviks, traitors, Zionists, etc. And even the freeze elections VPN slogan, Chance for Slovakia, was portrayed and renamed by nationalists as Chance for Israel. This is Fedor Gál, and let me just mention a few words about Fedor. Obviously this is an anti-Semitic cartoon brought by one of daily newspapers in Slovakia at that time. Fedor Gál is Jewish, and Fedor Gál is one of those few people who were born in Theresienstadt in 1945, and he survived. He became one of the leaders of the Velvet Revolution in Slovakia and chairman of the movement until 1991. In 1990, Fedor Gál and others made the terrible mistake that they picked up as a Minister of Interior person who, some of you might know that name, Vladimir Mečiar, person who almost destroyed Central Europe, although now he's just a retired person somewhere in Central Slovakia. By the way, that was one of the most bizarre selection of Minister of Interior in the history. They simply organized a competition. Intellectuals after successful revolution were thinking, some of them were political scientists, sociologists, painters, whatever. And, okay, so who will be running Ministry of Interior? So let's organize a competition, that will be fair. And suddenly a guy came and he knew everything about internal structure of a communist Ministry of Interior. And those guys just didn't come to the idea, how come he knows everything about Ministry of Interior under communism. So Vladimir Mečiar became Minister of Interior, and later, unfortunately, he not only buried all these people, but also almost buried the chances of Slovakia to be part of the civilized world. But thank God in 1998 we defeated it. But when Fedor Gál already understood with his friends in the VPN that Vladimir Mečiar is the danger person, they removed him from the position of prime minister at that time, and he became the most salient, visible symbol of betrayal and anti-Semitic campaign forced him to leave Slovakia. I mean, I know Fedor since those times, and he was literally beaten every day on streets. People were spitting on him, and he decided to leave to Prague. So he emigrated to Prague even during Czechoslovakia. Most of people, of course, deny that Fedor Gál became a victor of anti-Semitism, following interpretation scheme. There is no anti-Semitism in Slovakia, and if yes, it is Jews who are responsible for it. Okay? Martin Butora. Martin Butora is one of the most prominent figures of civil society these days in Slovakia, also sociologist in the same way as Thomas Masaryk. And Martin Butora is not Jewish. His Jewishness was constructed, and it has been constructed since 1989. Because of many reasons, precisely because he is very cosmopolitan, because he was working on various projects connected to Holocaust with Yale University, let's say, in the past. And for many, many Slovaks, even those who are not necessarily nationalistic, he is Jewish. One of interesting, since there are Israeli colleagues here, let me tell you, I mean, pretty brutal story from the streets of Bratislava when he was campaigning for becoming a Slovak president. Suddenly a guy approached him and asked him, Mr. Butora, are you Jewish? Well, no. And again, Martin answered in the same way as always, well, I'm not Jewish, but I wouldn't mind because, I admire Jews very much. But, again, I must repeat, again, I'm not Jewish. And he said, oh, that's a pity. I'm sorry you are not, because, there are problems with Roma in this country, and I hope that you as a Jewish person would do the same as Israel did with Palestinians, a really harsh approach is needed here. I'm so sorry you are not Jewish. So it went as far as to these nonsenses, so even people who are not nationalistic simply think that Martin Butora is Jewish. And it's a result of systematic campaign against him. And of course, there are similarities with anti-Semitic myths about Thomas Masaryk, because pretty immediately after Martin Butora started to run for president, all these myths started to pop out in Slovak media, and now basically the whole population of Slovakia is well aware of Jewishness of Martin Butora, although he is not Jewish. And it has again direct consequences on how people see eventual Jewish president of the country. You see, in every country there is some resistance to it, but in Slovakia, immediately after Poland, it's still relatively high. So I know I'm speaking too much, so we are close to the end. Cases of Masaryk from beginning of 20th century, Goldstücker from 1968, Gál from 1991, Butora from 2004 when he was running for president, suggest what is the main reason and function of anti-Semitic campaigns: to get rid of liberal elites from the politics and social life. So anti-Semitism proved to be a good way how to bring false stones into the discussion about modernization of the country. And last slide, and then we can open the discussion. So anti-Semitism in Central Europe is primarily not about Jews anymore. It plays a role in the political battle over open society and liberal democratic regime. But make no mistake, the fact that it's not about Jews anymore doesn't mean that it cannot be awaked in that way. This is exactly what I'm afraid personally these days in Hungary. That when you are using anti-Semitism in a political battle too much, it might be turned against Jews. And since I know people like Agnes Heller in Budapest, she told me how she found David stars on her on her doors in her apartment. So I mean, so not in public space, but actually on her apartment. And this is exactly dangerous. Anti-Semitism, of course, serves a function of exclusion and disqualification of liberal elites fostering liberal pluralism and multicultural society. And anti-Semitism, although not dramatically visible at the moment, influences processes of modernization of Central European countries even these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have about half an hour for Q&A. Daniel?
Thank you very much. I love your approach that anti-Semitism is instrumental in some way, but it doesn't make it less dangerous. Totally agree. So I just want to come from the conclusion. I have a remark. I have one major remark and a question. About the remark, I would like to just add nuances what you just said. It's true that political discourse in Central Europe is full with anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, not just fringe parties, but mainstream parties as well, in Hungary and in other countries as well. On the other hand, the physical safety of the Jews are much more secure in Central Europe than in Western Europe. We all saw yesterday that CSP has to make enormous efforts to protect the Jews. That's not happening in Central Europe. Jews are safe. In Hungary, there was no violent attack against the Jewish community in the last year. And after the regime change, there were only minor violations. So that's one thing. And the other is about the survey data. I do many surveys, and the problem with the surveys, I'm not saying that we shouldn't take the data seriously, because we should. There's a problem that the surveys overestimate the knowledge of the respondents. So, and every citizen doesn't know much about the Jews, doesn't have any idea about them. Most of them haven't even seen a Jewish person in their life, or at least they were not aware. So when we make statements that the influence of the Jews in the media are too much, or the Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus and so on, it's not something which many people talk about. It's not something that they didn't entertain the thought. It's not something that crossed their mind. So after many questions, they hear this statement, and well, some of them fails at the test and agrees. But I wouldn't say that they are necessarily anti-Semite in the sense that they are violent, they discriminate a Jewish person. I'm not even sure that they are prejudiced, especially these days in post-truth politics, when it's becoming harder and harder to distinguish the truths and the stupid fake news. It's, I'm not saying that we shouldn't blame people who agree with anti-Semitic statements. I'm just saying that it's not that easy that we say that they are anti-Semite, and then the data shows that 1/3 or sometimes even half of the population is anti-Semite. And oh my God, what a country! So I don't think that's a good way. Again, I'm not saying that the data are not showing anything. I'm just saying that we should be careful with the result. And finally, my question is that do you have fresh data about Slovakia, Czech Republic, for Poland? Because most of them were from the 90s. So what's the tendency? Increase, decrease, and so on. So thank you again.
Should I collect some questions, or is responding immediately? Okay. I'm afraid I will be not short. Speaking of the remark, yeah, it's totally right. Many people have problems in Central Europe to imagine who is actually Jewish. But that's actually even more dangerous. That's more dangerous because for many people, Jewish person is not a human being. It's kind of a mythical creature which is conspire against average people, from behind, somewhere. And I believe that this is actually much more dangerous situation. I'm recalling the book which was very influential some 15 years ago, Professor Barkun from the University of New York in Ithaca, Fusion of Paranoia. And he was actually suggesting how internet itself and all various types of conspiratory thinkers are influencing each other. So those who eventually believe that there is a world conspiracy of Jews are somehow belonging to the old school. Only those who are combining with some reptiles and eventually aliens from the space, they are somehow up to date. And this is very dangerous, that suddenly far too many people, and this is what I see in Slovakia, and very much probably in Hungary as well, suddenly it's losing the content which was there even in tragic times of the World War II. And suddenly, Jewish person is simply mysterious. In the same way as in Middle Ages, Jews were somehow connected in the eyes of average Christians to devil. And they had problems to understand what's going on. And again, if you think I'm going too far, even the most idiotic accusations of Jews, let's say, ritual murder, or accusation of poisoning Christians, you would say, hardly can anybody believe that. Well, not really. Let me tell you the story. In 1945, the only pogrom in Czechoslovakia after the World War II happened in the city of Topolčan. It was September 1945, and it started in a very innocent way. One of parents went to local monastery, which served as a school at that time, and he wanted to pick up his daughter from a school. And he realized doors are closed. And he learned that local physician, doctor of medicine, is actually giving vaccination to children. And the doctor happened to be Jewish. So the person returned to the main square and started to scream, "Jews are poisoning our children." And a pogrom started. In 1945, you would say, this accusation of poisoning Christians, that comes from 11th century. I mean, that's out of date. Well, not really. And this is, in my view, dangerous, that suddenly it's losing a human dimension. And the question, fresh data, there are fresh data, but again, as a sociologist, I'm very disappointed by those data. Because they are not testing anti-Semitism, in my view. They are very often testing attitudes toward Jews, which is not necessarily about anti-Semitism. I mean, there are many sophisticated ways how to ask about anti-Semitism. Let me bring you just examples from Germany, let's say. In 60s, German sociologists were asking, and this is absolutely missing in the region, were asking German respondents how they feel about various types of Jews. So, German Jews, Jews from Eastern Europe, Zionists, Israelis, American Jews. And the differences were stunning. While only 13% of Germans were rejecting the group of German Jews, it was actually 65% were rejecting Jews from Eastern Europe. So, to see 13%, you would say, oh, German society is not very anti-Semitic. To see 65, you would say, oh, this is tragically anti-Semitic society. No, those are very different groups. In some countries, Polish colleagues were testing also the level of philo-Semitism. Questions like, if this country was run by Jews since 1989, we would be much better off. I mean, that sounds like a very positive statement. But in fact, it's, where I'm heading to. It's about, these Jews have connections to Wall Street, they know how to work with money, so if they were running this country, of course we would be much better off. So, it's a philo-Semitic statement, but in fact it's deeply anti-Semitic. because it's, you know, it's reproducing various prejudices about Jews. You know, and this is what I'm saying, that sometimes I feel that studying anti-Semitism in Central Europe is not what it should be. But yeah.
That's okay. There's just a point of clarification. Did you actually say that there are no incidences of anti-Semitism in Hungary for the past year?
No physical attack.
According to what?
I will show you.
Because I find this astounding. You know, it's astounding because the Hungarian Jewish community feels that they're in a state of crisis right now, and I spent some time there not too long ago, meeting with Jewish leaders, and I can assure you, wherever your analysis is coming from, there's a huge gap between what the community is reporting and what this body of research consists of. So,
are they worried about physical attacks or the anti-Semitic dialogue which is going on the political discourse?
I'm not an expert on Hungarian society, so I speak a little bit of humility, but the experts that I spoke to are concerned about physical attacks and certainly about the discourse and the treatment of the Roma, which is not so far from the treatment of the Jews, and the rise of nationalism. People are thinking of leaving.
Mhm.
So
That's not the picture I experienced.
but okay, but I think there are reports that show that there are instances of anti-Semitism, and there are issues of who's collecting the data, and does the population trust the people collecting the data, like they trust the police to, etc., etc. So I think Hungarian society on the radar of scholars dealing with anti-Semitism, it's near the top of the list, and there's some very serious issues there. I can't imagine there's no instances.
I'm not denying that anti-Semitism is an issue. I'm just saying that no violent attacks. It's just verbal.
I'd say no. I would have to say that no attacks have been reported to. Which source are you referring to? The police? Because last year we had.
Jewish NGO.
Well, last year we had a scholar of police and security who was here and who's very well aware of hate crimes against the Jewish population. I should introduce you. She's in Budapest, a fantastic scholar.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much for your lecture. Just now I noticed that you mentioned any form of neo-antisemitism and antisemitism serves as a way of fighting against European society. I just wonder, in Central European countries, how antisemitism not only targets Jewish people, but it came to play a very important role in the political battle over open society.
I'm a little bit lost.
Oh, you,
Can you just rephrase it somehow?
okay, my question is that just now you mentioned that in nowadays Central European country, anti-Semitism maybe not target Jewish people. It came to play an important role in the political battle over open society.
Yes.
Okay. What do you exactly mean when you say that? Thank you.
The changes of communist regime in 1989, of course, were somehow produced by people who immediately from the beginning wanted to not only build functioning capitalistic society, if you want, I mean, in some cases return to, you know, successful industrial era countries such as in the Czech Republic, or, you know, in some other cases, to build modern industrial society from the scratch. But of course, in most of countries, immediately from the beginning there was a vision to build open society, which would be copying the model from the Western Europe. And in most of countries, there was a vision to combine the best from Scandinavia in terms of social welfare, from UK in terms of society which is built upon certain gentleman agreements, etc. Yeah, well-functioning administration, typical for Germany. So liberal, and of course to build liberal society, liberal democratic regime, which would be open also toward minorities, and minorities in a broad sense. And of course, the recent battle in those countries is exactly about this, you know, how much they will be open, liberal democracies for the future. And all those who are, for the last 2.5 decades, fighting for liberal democratic regime, sooner or later, once they will start to speak in favor of minorities, if you want these days for LGBT groups, sooner or later they might face the accusation they are Jews. I mean, it happened to me. I mean, you know, that's why I mentioned, since I was working on anti-Semitism, I was accused of Jews, of being of Jewish origin. And when I started to laugh that, guys, you know, I'm really not Jewish, they said, okay, so you are even worse because you are a white Jew. You know, you are even worse.
So did I hear you say the rejection of neoliberalism regime?
No, not neoliberal, not neoliberal. Liberal democracy.
Democracy is equivalent to being a Jew.
No.
Or you just
Jews are understood as
labeled as a Jew.
Yeah, Jews are understood as cosmopolitan people who try to impose liberal democratic regime in order to be successful in a society, because only then they can function well in connection with Jews in the rest of the world. You know, this type of conspiratory thinking.
No, hold on. So,
thanks for your lecture, first of all. And this stems from radical Islam and political Islam, and how you are evaluating the currently Central European, anti-Semitism driving forces, really? How do you contextualize the first, second, third? And which factors play a role in driving forces of anti-Semitism in the Central European societies, for example?
Driving forces. Well, for a second. No. There is. Look, anti-Semitism is cultural code for those who are rejecting open, liberal, democratic society. You know, they are able to recognize themselves. You know, let me just somehow give you example from biology. When termites are building, how is it called in English? When termite amount, yeah. You know, biologists for a long time didn't know how come that at certain point termites start to build their amount. Yeah, how come? And then they realized that it's about pheromones. That once there are enough of termites in an environment, of course there are more pheromones, and when it reached certain level, it's a signal. There is enough of us. We can build our amount. Yeah. And this is exactly, it's a cultural code. When through the anti-Semitism, they are able to recognize themselves,
Because history, for example, against Jews, the Central European Jews, taxes imposed more than another person, for example, in Central European countries. For example, in France, in Central European countries, for example, it is the kind of anti-Semitism, traditional anti-Semitism form. But currently, anti-Semitism traditional, being conservative and attached to Christianity, for example, in Central European countries.
I understand. No. Again, traditional anti-Semitism, which we should rather say, traditional anti-Judaism is gone. It's practically gone. You would be able to, and I'm saying it as a sociologist, because you would be able to identify to a certain extent in Poland, the last remnants of it in Slovakia, accusation of Jews that they are the ones who crucified Jesus, and all these nonsenses. That was very important 70, 80, 90 years ago, not anymore. But again, in traditional Catholic countries such as Poland and Slovakia, it's like an archetype which is alive and which is just serving other functions now. So the archetype is there. The kind of I would call it archetype of behavior. Of course, enlightened, secularized people don't care, and honestly speaking, most of them are laughing about all these things. But it doesn't mean that secular, enlightened people cannot be anti-Semites, of course. You know, in the same way as Voltaire and others. You know, Voltaire was, you know, an enlightened person and still, I mean, dramatically anti-Semitic.
Thank you. So then Larry and then.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I want all your slides and I want to read them again and again. Wonderful presentation. But there was something embedded that really frightened me, and that is that in all of the anti-Semitic examples that you gave, there was no case, as I understood it, there were no negative predicates against Jews. None of it said, Jews are bad, Jews are doing this, Jews are doing the other thing. They're bad. There was no negative predicates, no negative thing. Instead, Jew is a negative predicate. The painting someone with the label Jew is a negative thing. So it means that there's some underlying negativity. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. It's funny you said the biological example. The only example I can come up with is cancer. It's sort of, it's like cancer. It's like we assume that's a terrible thing. Everyone says, right? And in this case, it wasn't people sort of saying, oh, cancer is a bad thing, Jews are a bad thing. It just is, it's a dog whistle. It's, you know, this person is Jewish. That automatically means that they're disqualified. So doesn't that have to speak to an underlying anti-Semitism in order to work?
Absolutely yes, and again, that's why I brought this issue of non-inclusiveness. You know, because we should speak about two dimensions of it. First is non-inclusivity toward anybody who is different and who doesn't belong to our tribe. He, she doesn't have our blood. You know, I mean, sorry, Ulrike, I will mention something about Germany now. You know, and this is, you know, this is, you know, there is a third generation of Turkish people in Germany, and those people speak fantastic German with local accent. You know, very often they don't have citizenship of Germany, I mean, which is a bizarre thing. You know, for Americans, it's a bizarre thing. And they are not perceived as a part of the core. Exactly what I was saying, you know. I mean, you know, and this is something what Austrian political scientist Rainer Baubock calls racist paradox. So minorities ask to get integrated into the society, and when they are doing it and succeeding, and of course, in most of cases, minorities are doing it, majority is saying, you know, it's not enough. You should work much harder. So they are increasing demands, basically. And why is that? Because in fact, we don't want to see that minority to get integrated. Because we want to see the difference between us and them. Because, you know, if we define ourselves based on blood, if they will integrate into our body, their blood will mix with our blood. And that's not what we want. You know, suddenly, you know, we want to see the difference, you know, and this is a tragic of this blood-based tribal,
Blood-based core.
Blood-based core, because then suddenly those who are coming from outside cannot integrate. Whatever you will do, they will always stay in our group. And if you think I'm going too far, just think about German Jewry in 20s and 30s. The beginning of 20s, rabbis in Germany were warning, Jews will disappear from Germany. They don't visit synagogues. There is such a level of intermarriage with Germans. They don't care about Jewish traditions. You see, you know, they are becoming Germans, and we know what happened just a few years later. Even Goebbels' propaganda, eternal Jew. You remember, starting with this type of pictures. There are people who are dancing, obviously, well-being people who are dancing, and the propaganda is saying, look at them, they look like Germans, but be careful, they are not, they are Jews. You know, so in fact, so you hardly can distinguish between us and them, you know, so they became Germans, but be careful, they are not. You know, so in fact they succeeded, but we don't want them to succeed. So, you know, this is non-inclusivity. And then there is a second issue that since there are no Jews in Central Europe, unlike, you know, in the past, for some people, Jews became mysterious force which is behind everything bad what is happening to this world. Precisely because they don't see them. Yeah?
Yes.
And so you know, I personally experienced with my Jewish colleagues from the United States
when we were in Poland, and we were talking to anti-Semites, and my American colleague asked them, guys, I see that you are anti-Semite. I'm Jewish. Okay, you are Jewish. So you don't mind? No, let's have a beer, yeah, fine. So why you are anti-Semitic? No, it's not about you, it's about them. Those Jews, mysterious Jews, which, of course, you are fine, we don't have a problem with it. Because you admitted you are Jewish, so why would we should have a problem with it? And this is the problem in our countries, a mysterious Jewish creature, not person.
So Daniel and David.
Michael, thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. And with apologies to my Hungarian friends, it appears that Viktor Orban will be re-elected in Hungary, establishing a very long tenure as elected Prime Minister. He leads the liberal Europe. How do you see this furthering the dialogue? This question about anti-Semitism in the region, I think he's an important piece of that story.
In connection to anti-Semitism. Honest? Okay, and now I will be cynical, in the same way as Viktor Orban is. He will be utilizing anti-Semitism up to the level when it will be serving his interests. He knows that he knows he cannot cross the line, and the line is very clear. There cannot be any physical attacks against Jewish community in Hungary. That's a line. That's a red line. And this is exactly what we saw just a few days when Netanyahu met with 4 prime ministers of Visegrad Group countries in Budapest.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the whole discourse against George Soros was perfectly acceptable. Suddenly, Netanyahu even changed the words of ambassador of Israel to Hungary,
Right.
which of course, and I agree with the ambassador that this is outrageous. No, and suddenly Netanyahu came, Soros is our common enemy. He's financing B'Tselem, etc. So, this is our common enemy. But this is very dangerous. This is very dangerous because again, we are speaking about archetypes. And knowing Central Europe, let's not awake a ghost of the past, because they are there. And the discourse, which is, anti-Semitic, Soros with, just some slogans, anti-Semitic slogans, this is awakening archetypes which are dreaming, which are sleeping under the surface. And honestly speaking, in comparison to some other countries of the region, I must say that I'm surprised what's happening in Hungary these days. That Viktor went so far that he started to utilize the anti-Semitism in the political battle. Yeah, and of course, you can say that it's not him, but people around him. Viktor wouldn't say it personally, but he has people for that, so it's bizarre. No. He might be utilizing it again, but there is a red line, and he knows it.
Thanks. We have time for 2 more questions, David and Darren.
All right, thank you so much for that really, really very important lecture. I was wondering if you could comment on, you mentioned the Slovak fascist state and participation in the Holocaust, but as a separate issue, can you discuss a little bit recent efforts to glorify local Nazi collaborators, the whole issue of war crimes trials, and how you see that relating to foreign ethnicity?
I thought that will come, and thank you for that. And let me start. With personal note. In 1989, I really believed, as a person who grew up in Slovakia, at that time Czechoslovakia, that ghosts of the past are gone. I was very much convinced that the anti-Semitism is gone from the country, and it wasn't. Why I thought so? The first Czechoslovak movie which got Oscar, Obchod na Korze, the shop on a main street in 60s, was precisely about Slovak fascist state. And I thought that the learning from it, as I was learning, that the rest of society was learning as well.
it was, so I was caught by surprise that, not really, and the images of Slovak fascist state started to be utilized immediately after 1989, but still, even in dark times for democracy in 90s under Vladimir Mečiar, civil society was able to defeat the most visible cases of anti-Semitism in the country. Good example, there was an attempt to distribute books into all primary schools in 97, produced by one of neo-fascist author, emigre from Australia, Slovak emigres from Australia, which was outrageous, which was glorifying Slovak fascist state. And the Slovak civil society was able to convince Vladimir Mečiar that too much is too much. And of course he was afraid of reactions from the West, so he said, okay, this is not where we should go. And honestly speaking, Mečiar was not even utilizing anti-Roma sentiment, so interestingly not. But that started to change in recent years, dramatically, and it changed completely since last year when Slovak fascists made it to parliament. And suddenly, what wouldn't be possible 10 years ago is filling the not only public space, but Slovak internet is full of it. And honestly speaking, I see that increasingly they are winning. They are winning, and there is, we have an experience that we travel to remote regions of Slovakia from time to time to discuss with young people how they voted, why they voted that way. And we are realizing that in these remote areas, people are ready to vote for Slovak fascists. Their personal hero is Vladimir Putin, and simply, suddenly, all these authoritarian tendencies you can think of, Putin, Slovak fascist state, Nazism, are merging into a really dramatic cocktail. Okay? Still, the recent government is trying to fight the most visible cases of supporting supporting Slovak fascist state. There are cases brought to the court. So you cannot say that Fico's government wouldn't be trying. I think that they should try more. I mean, I definitely, and especially on Facebook, on internet, so the issue of hate speech at the moment, that's a key issue. How to convince young generation that simply what they are saying are nonsense.
So, on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much. Presentation, and it's a very important presentation. I just want to say too that I think one of the important elements of this program is the interdisciplinary nature of our work, and to look at things from a conceptual, empirical perspective, from different regional perspectives. And I think by doing this in a comprehensive framework, sometimes things don't add up. I think if we go to a society that has a legacy of anti-Semitism for centuries, that is structured into society, structured into the theology, the social science, the symbols, into the economic, social, and cultural processes, and we find that the statistic points to no anti-Semitism, or the statistics point to large jumps in anti-Semitism, we have to take it from a comprehensive perspective to understand what's going on in these processes. So your presentation is very important for that. On